Like faith and prayer, the Orientalist artist's portrayal of women is complex and, depending upon the picture, controversial. In the 19th century, from an art perspective, it was a man's world. They were the artists and the buyers. Critics of the genre contend European men responded to eroticized, even degrading, pictures of women. These tended to focus on harem scenes and images of slave markets, even when they were accurately portrayed conditions of the time. There was clearly a second type, which is our focus. These seeking authenticity, capturing dignity, and the simple beauty of the figures. This is our intent in examining how Orientalist artists depicted women in the Islamic culture. The American artist John Singer Sargent painted this icon of Orientalism, perhaps the most elegant and dignified representation of women in the genre, entitled Fumée d'Ambergris. He pictured a young woman perfuming herself by capturing the fragrant smoke from burning ambergris, the highly prized substance used to make perfume. This masterpiece is composed mostly of varying shades of white. Simple but elegant images of daily life, like this piece by Italian artist Ruben Santoro, depicts three women going for a morning walk. To the Western viewer, this is an intriguing look at a very different world, yet executed with dignity. Quite understandably, many images depicted women caring for their children. It is a theme that is as old as painting itself. Here we see a simple image of two women and a small child, painted by Dutch Orientalist Willem Testus. Given the ancient ruins partially obscured by shifting sands, the scene is in the outskirts of Cairo. After his first trip to Cairo in 1853, Testus' work caught the attention of John Singer Sargent, who invited him to a second trip with a number of other fellow artists in 1868. Here we see a mother pouring water into her child's cup. The Austrian artist's name is Paul Schreiber. Little is found on him, and only 3 examples have come to auction. Nevertheless, his skill and great use of color, midday light, and contrasting shadow is clearly evident. This is a second work by Schreiber, depicting a woman clad in white, walking in a narrow alleyway, possibly in Tunisia. Gustave Goyamet was an important French Orientalist artist, best known for his paintings in Algeria, which he visited 10 times between 1861 and 1867. He preferred to paint scenes of life in southern Algeria, where conditions were more harsh and barren, as seen in this major piece entitled La Gouatte, painted in 1879. His compassion for the ordinary people is seen in this street scene. Goyamet painted numerous images of mother and child, often depicted in doorways. It is believed this work is a study for the larger piece that we've just looked at. Leon Belli, the painter of pilgrims going to Mecca, painted this well-known image of fellahin, women gathering water from the Nile. The composition emphasizes the 4 women working together, completing what is likely a daily chore. His very conscious choice of lighting, more accurately, source of backlighting, produces an almost sculptural image of the figures. When we looked at the work by American artist Frederick Arthur Bridgman in the previous episode, we saw examples of his unique interior scenes of everyday life and tasks. These were authentic and no hint of sensual or exotic implications. Once again, Frederick Bridgman has brilliantly portrayed the most important day in a young girl's life, her wedding, entitled Preparations for the Wedding. Bridgman was in Algeria for his third trip in 1885 and resided in the tiny home of a widow named Bahia and her two daughters. From their terrace, he had an opportunity to observe the activities depicted in this masterpiece. The sense of expectation is seen on the bride-to-be's face, while the older ladies dutifully attend to her preparations. Purely from an art perspective, one can see Bridgman's style of dappled art and thicker paint applications beginning to acknowledge the development of Impressionism. This is not the smooth academic style taught by the early instructor Jean-Léon Gérôme. In this beautiful image of a lovely young lady appearing to be asleep, Bridgman has deftly included a long stem pipe resting against the table. Its position clearly indicates it has been smoked, thus assisting the reclining figure to gracefully achieve a state of kaif, as we described in an earlier episode. Kaif, relaxation, rest, perfectly happy, absence of troublesome conversation, and unpleasant memories. At the opposite end of the spectrum is Austrian artist Leopold Karl Müller's energetic image entitled, quote, The Alma's Admirers. I suspect there isn't a culture in the world that doesn't admire the image of a woman dancing. Müller's title uses the term Alme, which is Arabic and applies to a class of professionally trained entertainers in dancing, singing, and reciting classical poetry. They were considered in good social standings. This vibrant, active scene is accompanied with several musicians and grinning admirers. Müller was considered an exceptional Orientalist, with this being a major example. If an image of a woman is to be totally void of any sensual or exotic implications, Bridgman's painting entitled The Kabyle Woman projects the intensity, stoicism, and the antithesis of suggestive erotic overtones. This woman could be the CEO of a major company. It is a brilliant and authentic portrait. This major work is considered his finest image of women gathered in a casual social setting, but to the Western eye, it is an exotic scene of figures, color, flowing, and luxurious dress. The celebration of religious holidays was the best opportunity for Middle Eastern women to gather in large groups outdoors and talk, laugh, and gossip. Sometimes such gatherings are visits to cemeteries to pay respects to ancestors. Bridgman has captured the mystical qualities such a gathering would have to an outsider. The most famous and reproduced female figure in ancient Egyptian history is, without doubt, Cleopatra. It's said that paintings of Cleopatra, like paintings of Napoleon, are virtually a genre unto themselves, and perhaps should be somewhat separated from the broad topic of women in Orientalism. Taking a look at just two works, both acknowledges her presence and make a very interesting contrast. The first is an important work by French artist Alexandre Cabanel, entitled, quote, Cleopatra's Testing Poison on Those Condemned to Die, end quote. Cleopatra is pictured in perfect profile, replicating the images of women found in ancient Egyptian reliefs in tombs and temples. She looks on with icy indifference at the man helplessly succumbing to poison. In spite of the cruelty, there is a seductive quality to the painting. As a perfect companion and ultimate contrast is, quote, Death of Cleopatra by French artist Jean-André Rixon. As Roman troops are pursuing her into her palace, she has already tested the poison's effectiveness on the slave and has taken it herself. Succumbing to the very same method of execution she tested on others. Two paintings. The first, Cleopatra, is the executioner. The second, the executed. We've looked at how Western artists represented women in the Middle East. Now it's time to see how they painted, quote, real men. By the 19th century, gunpowder and other military innovations were standard use in European armies, and the way that wars were waged changed. Killing one another occurred at greater distances from one's enemy. Less and less was heroism achieved with two combatants facing one another in hand-to-hand struggle. Amid these changes, the travelers to the Middle East became intrigued with the appearance of guards, lavishly dressed, imposing, proud figures displaying a multitude of weapons, often outdated relics from the past, standing before a massive doorway or entrance into a grand hall. The master of painting, quote, the palace guard, was Austrian-born Ludwig Deutsch. This image speaks of a much earlier time with its staggering array of adornments. These figures were a magnet for the artist, an opportunity to display his painting prowess, capturing the sumptuous details of medieval regalia on an earlier Islamic warrior. Islam's growth over centuries exposed its armies to extensively diverse opponents and cultures, from West Africa to Hindu, Buddhist, resulting in capturing all types of weaponry which adorned the guards and sentries. There was no standard equipment. This second piece by Ludwig Deutsch must be considered the tour de force of the genre. Found in this masterpiece are gold gilding, chain mail, bone, silken fabrics, wood, iron, marble, and various other metals and inlay work. The posture and stoic expression is hypnotic. I believe the European and American Orientalists never encountered anything this, quote, paintable in their own countries as this figure. Of course, other extremely talented artists tackled this subject as well. The Czech artist Raphael von Ambros presents a slightly different execution of this genre entitled Blessing the Arms, painted in 1888. The central figure has put his weapon before an open book, likely the Quran, placed on a bookstand. Behind is an array of similar guards participating in some fashion in the blessing ritual. Each of the supporting figures is placed in a different posture to add interest and authenticity to the scene. As the viewer has gathered by now, the center of interest in the guard's dress is the front sash for carrying a staggering array of weapons around the waist and called a saliak in Arabic. Seen here is a variety of these belts. One lengthy description of the saliak reads as follows, quote, composed of several oblong pieces of leather cut to fit the front part of the body. Between each fold, there is room to fit a weapon. A substantial strap is fashioned around the waist. It is made of all kinds of material, from plain Moroccan leather to the richest velvet embroidered in gold. In addition to what the saliak can hold, the figure may have a bandolier slung over his shoulder, carrying a cartridge case, powder flask, flint and steel priming horn, and other necessities. His weapons should consist of a pair of long-barreled, silver-mounted flint pistols and large and small daggers, and additionally, the proper attired man carries a sword hung over his shoulder by a crimson silk cord, and, not to be left behind, a long-barrel rifle. If the man wishes to be respected, all these weapons must shine like silver, for the proper care of arms is a sign of manliness. End of quote. Here we see another piece by Deutsch, entitled, quote, The Answer. With the elaborately attired figure in the foreground, Deutsch has paid particular attention to the magnificently embroidered silk robe that the guard is wearing. Many of these guards, including the shadowy figure in the background, were of Nubian descent. And of course, ever-present Jean-Léon Gérôme contributed to the palace guard genre, with this work entitled The Flag Bearer. The figure stands stoically at his post, with his face concealed. Gérôme also painted this breathtaking work of a unique figure in a turbulent world of Islam, called the Bashi Bazouk. These were irregular troops who fought for the Turks in the Ottoman Empire. The term means leaderless or damaged. They were ruthless and designed to terrorize their enemies. They were basically unpaid, living off plunder and what they could steal. This Bashi Bazouk appears to be harmless, resting in the sun. A closer look, he's examining a gold chain from a pearl inlaid box, coins spilled on the ground, and other objects at his feet, including a Bible. He's examining his loot. On the left, in the back courtyard, are two dead figures, probably Christians. By the time the Orientalists were painting, the Bashi Bazouk were not a threat. Yet, they were seen in their attire and certainly attracted the attention of artists. One historian of the period called them, quote, soldiers of ornament, end quote. One of the many surprises to emerge from artists being so attracted to the subject is this richly painted piece entitled Arab Sentinel, painted by the Spanish artist Antonio Costa. Costa had been trained and practiced as a sculptor. The splendor of these images caused him to largely abandon his career and focus on oil painting. This is not only his first attempt at Orientalism, it is his first oil painting in general. The simplicity of the Sentinel's white garment is offset by the huge array of shapes, colors, textures, and surfaces found in the rest of the composition, from rugs, marble columns, complex tile work behind the figure. Costa continued to pursue Orientalist themes, but on occasion produced images like this, which have been criticized for pandering to European male fantasies. The German artist Adolf Seele was fascinated with the legendary Alhambra in Granada, Spain, and painted numerous works throughout this mammoth structure, often just depicting its ornate architectural features. This work is entitled The Night Guard, who is appropriately attired in the guard's paraphernalia that we've seen in previous works. In the lower right corner, one sees all the antiquated rifles owned by the seated figures in the distance. The great painter of India, Edwin Lord Weeks, has created a magnificent image of armed guards at a time when a vast portion of northern India was ruled by Muslim Mughal dynasty, circa 1600s. The work is entitled quote, entering the mosque, depicting two worshippers preparing to attend the mosque for prayer, being watched by two elaborately attired armed guards. The fruit seller, in the lower left corner, seems to be watching the scene with very little interest. As with the majority of Weeks's paintings, it is bathed in brilliant, warm light. There is no denying the strong visual appeal to artists and the buyer of this subject. The richness of color and complexity of the composition for the artist, plus the masculine appeal to the male buyer. It was a magical combination.
1, 10, anyone? No one? He kissed you with Caesar's lips, touched you with his hands, as if in his name you cried out in the dark. And afterwards...
There's a Richard Burton, we all know. Son of a Welsh coal miner, gifted actor, Cleopatra's seducer, and renowned imbiber of alcohol. Meet a far more extraordinary Captain Sir Richard Burton, 1821 to 1890. Even among his enemies, and he had a collection of them, it was agreed he had the best mind of his generation, crammed with history, geography, poetry, philosophy, fluent in 29 languages, and if you include distinct dialects, the number is 40. With a commanding basso profundo voice, he could engage a formidable opponent in verbal fisticuffs and walk away smiling. As many as 30 books have been written about the man and his life. He's been described as a combination of T.E. Lawrence, Marquis de Sade, Ernest Hemingway, and Rasputin. The costumed man-of-action celebrity of Lawrence, the shocking bawdiness of de Sade, the voluminous writing, masculine bravado of Hemingway, the piercing, demonic gaze of Rasputin describes the tall, handsome, strong as an ox explorer who captured the attention and fascination of the age of daring explorers. By the end of his life, he had written 43 volumes about his travels in regions of the world as diverse as India, the Sahara, Mormon Utah, and the Amazon. The contents of these works qualify him as a soldier, explorer, writer, poet, linguist, archaeologist, swordsman, surveyor, translator, diplomat, ethnologist, amateur physician, geologist, and botanist. All of this he did without a university degree. Raised in France and Italy, Burton didn't encounter Victorian England until arriving in England to attend Oxford or adapt to the rules of England. He quickly made enemies with his words and his writings, and within a year of entering Oxford, he was expelled for boredom and misbehavior. Soon thereafter, he entered the military at 21 years old and left for service in India. While his peers were attending tea parties and playing polo, Burton was studying languages and, disguised as a local, would mingle and gather intelligence on what the Indians really thought of the British. His views appeared in one of his scores of reports, quote, "Everybody knows that if people of India could be unanimous for a day, they might sweep us from their country as dust before the windstorm." End of quote. These observations caused him nothing but problems and an increasingly longer list of enemies seeking to denigrate and ruin his career. Late in his life, Burton would say, quote, "Honesty has not proven the best policy." Burton returned to England in 1850 and received a grant from the Royal Geographic Society to depart for Egypt. After considerable preparation in Cairo, Captain Burton transformed his appearance and took on the name of Haji Abdullah, an Afghan dervish, and joined a caravan as a pilgrim to enter Mecca and Medina. This image is a lithograph from an original drawing by Burton of himself. It is believed to be his appearance as he traveled to Mecca. He has totally changed: shaven head, beard, darkened skin, but with the same Burton countenance and piercing eyes. The danger of this venture was immense. If caught, he would be killed. Burton wrote extensively about his experiences in Mecca and his successful impersonation. 2 years later found him back on the Dark Continent in East Africa, becoming the first European to enter the dangerous city of Harar in present-day Ethiopia. Harar was a Muslim holy city with numerous mosques. As was his practice, he wrote about his experiences. It was on an exhibition that his camp was attacked by marauders, and during the fight, his cheek was pierced by a spear, which knocked out several teeth, cut open the roof of his mouth, and the tip of the spear came out the other side. The scars run from just below his eye down his cheek and adds to his sinister appearance as a man of action. This portrait of Burton, painted by Frederick Lord Leighton in 1875, reveals his facial scar. After leading an irregular cavalry regiment in the Crimean War, he departed on what might be his most famous exploration, to answer the puzzling mystery since ancient Roman Greece, to locate the source of the great Nile River. This effort was fraught with physical hardship, and later his findings were challenged by his enemies in London. It sounds simple. Where does the Nile, the longest river on Earth, over 4,100 miles, begin? It's been a romantic notion for centuries. The fact is, there are numerous sources that feed water into the Nile. Countries with rivers or lakes contributing the Nile include South Sudan, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Congo. Nevertheless, Burton is credited with being the first European to see Lake Tanganyika, which is the world's largest body of fresh water, shared by Tanzania, Zambia, Congo, and Burundi. Burton would go on to explore and hold posts in West Africa, Brazil, and Damascus, where he explored ancient ruins in Lebanon and Transjordan. Burton would continue to produce a steady stream of books and suffer from a catalog of diseases, infections, and fevers. At one time or another, he would experience malaria, dysentery, typhoid, ophthalmia, cholera, hepatitis, pneumonia, just to name a few. Burton's travels were extensive, but India and the Arab world, the land of Orientalist painters, were the principal motifs of his life. The majority of, quote, travel literature of the 19th century is archaic and of little practical use today. Not so with Burton. Many of his publications are still considered indispensable, such as documents on Icelandic history, the Sind, and races of the Indus Valley, being used in Pakistan, northern Somali culture, and many, many more. His ability to collect enemies and ride roughshod over the sensitivities of other men is revealed in this statement, quote, "It is not my fault I'm better educated than my fellows. I appear to them pedantic because I speak according to my nature. I would love to lower it in speaking to those whom I offend, if I knew how." Why is Sir Richard Burton included among the Orientalist painters that we've been discussing? Well, because of his unyielding compulsion to explore the unknown, understand it, and, like the painters, preserve it. But in his case, it's with words, not paint. He published 40 volumes of his explorations and almost 30 volumes of translations, including the unexpurgated translation of the Arabian Nights. With limited artist access to the living quarters of Arab families, the sprawling marketplaces found in every city were the richest source of subjects and scenes to paint. We will see many of them. Within these marketplaces were scores of crafts and tradesmen pursuing their occupations and dealing with shoppers. Whether providing a service or making goods for sale, they were appealing subjects to paint. We will also look at a unique group of distinct images that simply defy categorization, standing on their own while still being fascinating.